Welcome to the Order and Liberty podcast. My name is Nick Hankoff, my co-host, José Niño. Jose, we have a great show today. The topic is war. And what is more important than war? We have a lot to get to in this episode. Where should we start off?
Yeah, war has always been a big issue for me. I would say it was the principal policy question that got me hooked on to the Ron Paul campaign in 2007. Most people can allude to the famous Ron Paul Giuliani moment during the presidential debates around that time concerning 9/11. At that point, I was in high school, actually, and I was becoming kind of acquainted with the whole concept of foreign policy, and I quickly realized that these wars were not what the media was making them out to be. They were not about liberating people or spreading democracy. It was just a purely power grab type of tactic that the elites foisted upon us and put the blood and treasure of the country on the line, along with leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians abroad. It was one of the first red pills that got me to become more of the dissident right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my very similar track there onto the anti-war platform was with the Ron Paul campaign. And it was interesting then because it wasn't a left-wing angle on it. You know, the libertarians are sometimes known for saying that they're more left than the left and more right than the right, or that they take the best of the left and best of the right and put it together. And so people might think, oh, the libertarians just take the left-wing stance on anti-war. And really, the libertarian anti-war stance stems from an old right conservative stance against war. And so that was very compelling to me at that time. And now, I mean, obviously, this is like, we're talking like 20 years later, more than that after, even after going back to the Clinton wars, and you could really go back even further to the end of the Cold War, to the rise of the U.S. warfare state, unlike anything anyone had seen, that they would not have foreseen out of the ending of World War II. And so we're at this point now where it's a wonder how much worse it could get. And I do think it can get much worse, Jose. Right now, the endless wars and the CIA operations are just across the globe. As you say, the U.S. is in at least 800 bases. Depending on how you categorize these bases, you could stretch it to say the U.S. has 1,000 military bases around the world. But the U.S. and its CIA is in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, we know this, Somalia and Libya, many people know that as well. But what about Mali? What about Tunisia? What about Nigeria, Chad? All of these countries, the U.S. is active and involved in right now in what could not otherwise be defined as anything but war. We don't always call it war for political reasons, but that is the correct definition, politically incorrect or not, if you ask me. Now, the empire that we have today seems to be slowing down. Like, it seems to be a lull. We've had President Trump drop the MOAB on Afghanistan. We've had him bomb Syria, although that was pretty early in his presidency. And perhaps Trump thought he could quell some of his pro-war critics by going all out earlier on in his presidency. You know, he did have some outreach to North Korea. Whether or not that's successful is yet to be seen, really. But there's other maneuvers that Trump has taken in the world that have been unfavorable to the warfare state, the military-industrial complex. We've seen General Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense, come out against Trump, and we've seen, you know, of course, the late great John McCain, Jose, who you know is followed up now by Meghan McCain, as Liz Cheney has followed up after her father in condemning this president on his his record of not starting any new wars. You know, Trump can be commended for not starting any new wars because you know we had just an unprecedented explosion in bombings in wars just being started on very whimsical, like obvious lies, as Trump campaigned on, saying these wars were started on lies, going back 2 administrations at least. And so now we have a situation where, you know, Trump is not ending wars, but not really starting wars either. So there seems to be a lull. And nonetheless, this seems to not really be what Trump promised, right? Trump promised anyway to get us out of these countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., Syria. He campaigned on that, whereas Hillary Clinton was going to basically shoot down Russian jets and start World War III with Russia. Nuclear holocaust was going to happen in 2021. And that's a big reason why the American people voted for Trump. So what this is all getting at, Jose, is that the American people are really against the empire and for the republic. You know, Pat Buchanan wrote a book called A Republic, Not an Empire. And the old rightist, Garrett, going back way back in the 40s and the 50s, Garrett wrote against empire building and pro-republic. So that was the position of the conservatives before the neoconservative takeover. And this is the side that's really coming up now, the America First paleo-conservative view on foreign policy. And that is a recognition that foreign policy dictates domestic policy. Those who now want to push foreign policy in a certain direction, meaning more expansion, more U.S. power abroad, are really the same woke brigade that's bringing this domestic leftist radicalism into the streets of America. It's all one party, and that is the warfare welfare state. And this facilitates what Garrett called a revolution within the form, so that the American system really from under our noses is just flipped inside out, upside down, however you want to characterize it. But the empire and what the U.S. does abroad ultimately dictates what happens at home. We saw this with the TSA. We see this with the militarization of police. And it just changes the face of the nation, and it is towards ultimately this sort of internationalist globalist end, and it's fundamentally anti-American, but they use pro-American patriotic symbolism to get people to support this in lockstep. So that to me is the big picture of war and how we should perceive it. And that opens up a lot of questions about where the country might go in the future, especially if Biden wins, right? And what will wars of the future look like? Because we know Biden won't be president for long if he wins. What will the woke wars of the future look like? And with a rising left, should we take that for granted? It's a wonder they're not talking about foreign policy and war anymore, right, Jose?
Yeah, the war issue is one of the biggest points of departure that I've noticed among the American right over the last century. Because as you mentioned before, Nick, the old right used to be very anti-interventionist. In fact, they understood that liberal internationalist foreign policy was not only anti-conservative, it was essentially a move towards empire, going from a humble republic to an empire. And I believe that these conservative commentators were correct in their assessment about the nature of the U.S. government's global crusades abroad. They have fundamentally transformed the United States in ways that the founding fathers would have never imagined. And first, to just start it off, with saying that these wars would be for preserving democracy and making the world safe for democracy, but now they've metastasized into something else, and they're starting to incorporate a lot of the hobby horses of the radical left, such as feminism, LGBTQ, and woke stuff. I believe that in future presidential administrations that are likely going to feature tons of woke propaganda and woke administrative officials, they will wage these conflicts against countries that are not sufficiently woke or that don't have, say, enough protections for LGBT. It might not be even like kinetic wars. In fact, they may just sanction countries outright and use a lot of soft power and regime change strategies to get these countries in line. Because let's face it, the US is an empire, it's the global hegemon, and it can get away with a lot of this stuff. And I think one of the biggest failures of the last like 50 years is the fact that there has not been an effective right that has questioned the warfare state. And even on the left, which used to be anti-war, has practically pulled a Casper the Friendly Ghost on this entire subject. And they only oppose Republican-led wars, but when a Democrat or any person on the left is in charge, they are as quiet as a mouse. And it's pretty sad. And I'm of the opinion, as you said before, Nick, that it's probably going to be a resurgent old right, paleocon, paleo-libertarian right that will bring back the anti-war cause. And there is good news within the Trump administration with his recent nomination of the retired Colonel Douglas McGregor, who some of our listeners may be acquainted with if they've followed Tucker Carlson's show. McGregor has been one of the biggest critics of foreign policy intervention abroad and neocon policy making in general. And I think that his nomination is a good first step. Hopefully he becomes the ambassador to Germany, because the Trump administration needs to be staffed with the right people who can give him the right advice or at least carry out policies that are America first in general, because America first is all about protecting our borders and putting the defense of the American people first, not the defense of Saudi Arabia, Israel, South Korea, or Germany first. And that's what I originally thought the Donald Trump election would be about, but it's had its roadblocks so far. That said, I think that Trump is a marked improvement from the overwhelming majority of the Republican primary field in 2016, and even obviously Hillary Clinton on the issue. So it's going to take some time, but I think that as long as we can keep grassroots pressure for war matters, we can absolutely change the discussion.
Yeah, that's a bright spot in the Trump administration's record on foreign policy, is the nomination of Douglas McGregor to this ambassadorship to Germany. But what I hope is that this wasn't a move to sort of quell or silence this non-interventionist voice that is, a part of the Trump agenda in a sense, but always ends up losing out. And so this move, the nomination, if the nomination isn't fought for hard, if he loses the position as ambassador to Germany, then what's going to happen after that, right? They're going to say, oh, well, we tried and he failed, and so therefore we see like this doesn't work in politics or something like that. But Douglas McGregor is fantastic. He should have been the next John Bolton. He should have been in a much higher position. And so while I'm glad to see his nomination for ambassadorship to Germany, I can't help but wonder, is this just a move to, what they do is they just throw you some treats, right? And hope like a good little doggy, you'll go away and just take the treats and stop stop barking and stop, raising hell. And so that's what I'm afraid of in this one example. But all the same, we have to back Douglas McGregor. He is one of the most prominent non-interventionist voices with a military background, and so it's just it has to be taken as good news. But we also have to watch out for ulterior motives for having him nominated for this position, because if he's good enough for this position, why was John Bolton ever in his position, and why is one of John Bolton's lackeys now the one replacing him? So just something to think about. But as you were saying, the old right position that opposed NATO, opposed this sort of like global collective security force, and really saw the U.S. turning into an empire as opposed to staying a constitutional republic. That old right position is forming now. We do see it, and that's what war does. Ultimately, it might take several decades, but war will powerfully shift the country's politics for better or for worse. And war will radically alter a country's makeup, for better or for worse. And I think over the course of American history, it has been for the worse. We do see the neoconservatives pushing for war in the same sense that they push for open immigration, which we talked about on another episode. And so this invade the world, invite the world mentality is a radical notion for how a country should be set up and run. And that's what's happening in today's America. It's a tool. War is used as a tool. Soldiers are used as pawns toward a greater end. And that greater end is not some patriotic victory at the end of the day where the American flag is planted and will not move, and the values are steadfast. No, it's about changing the country to fit a larger project. And so we do see the politics shifting there. And you did mention that maybe it won't be all out and out wars, that perhaps we'll see just heavy sanctions on countries that are not sufficiently woke. And I hope so, Jose. I hope we have that that much to hope for, because Hillary Clinton was, as I said, about to start World War III with Russia, invite a nuclear holocaust on day one in office, because she wanted to institute a no-fly zone over Syria, where the United States was not even welcome, but the Russian military was. And so just for the sake of toppling Assad in Syria, we were going to go to war with Russia, and in a much fiercer, more irresponsible way than any time during the decades of the Cold War. And relations between the U.S. and Russia are worse than ever, even under Trump. And as Trump will tell you, he's been the hardest on Russia than any other president. So we see Trump really yielding to the war powers, even though he was campaigning against them and won on his campaign. So that is another thing to worry about, because now Trump campaigning that he's the hardest on Russia and the toughest on Russia. Who's going to believe that, and who's voting for him on that issue, right? They're just going to say Biden is going to be that much tougher. They're going to go for Biden, and we are going to have whoever Biden's vice president is take over. That'll be the next Hillary Clinton. It'll be the next, nuclear holocaust type of war that people have thought ended with the end of World War II. And I just don't see it happening, because look at Hillary Clinton's record in Libya, and she's hailed as a hero for this. The footage is still there to see Hillary Clinton's live, unscripted reaction to the assassination, the death of Gaddafi in Libya. Her glee is just horrifying, and it became a meme because you have to laugh at it, but it really is horrifying that someone thinks and acts that way like she does, and so many do. So many who hold her up as a hero. So while we might have avoided a Hillary Clinton presidency, I don't think we've avoided a Hillary Clinton presidency in so many ways. And so the right has to line up behind the original America First, Make America Great Again agenda of getting out of these wars. And that is, I believe, to the credit of Ron Paul. So those Ron Paulians out there who think they're going to get somewhere with the Libertarian Party and not, really push Trump and push these bright spots of McGregor being appointed, I think they're mistaken. And it really is a tough choice. Fair enough. Trump's angered a lot of anti-war people, or even just non-interventionist people with his actions in Afghanistan and Syria. But it is a complicated world out there. It can't be denied. And Trump is succumbing to pressures, whether he should or should not. Certainly, it seems like he shouldn't, because he overcame the Bushes, overcame the Clintons in 2016. He should be unstoppable, but apparently he's not. And so we do see that as a consequence. And these wars, they shift countries. They are not in America's best interest. They're often in foreign countries' best interest, or just people who have no loyalty to any country, their best interest, right? Those who profiteer off of these wars. And so do you think that let me ask it this way, Jose, how does the right coalesce around this issue? Because in one sense, war is just not a high priority for people. In another sense, I do see a pattern where the American people, can consistently choose the anti-war candidate on the ballot, whether it's George W. Bush in the year 2000 running on a humble foreign policy. Yes, he ran on that humble foreign policy of non-intervention in the year 2000. They voted for, obviously, they voted for Barack Obama in 2008, who promised to end the wars and really did a huge surge in Afghanistan and started new wars in Libya and Pakistan and throughout the world, and Yemen, we're all familiar with. And so then they voted for Trump, and Trump was the anti-war candidate against Clinton. So the American people do tend to go for the anti-war candidate, but we also know that it's not necessarily a high priority for them, especially when the economy is not doing well. And so maybe it depends on the economy, but how do you see the right coming together? If it's so necessary, are we just supposed to expect that it happens naturally, or how do you see the right coming together to return the correct position to the right wing that is a republic, not an empire? How do you see that coming about?
I think that the right needs to channel the populist energy of the 2016 Trump campaign and explain how the warfare state fuels the military-industrial complex and creates massive misallocation in resources that transfers wealth from the working class to these rent-seeking defense contractors, and show that connection, as well as the connection that most of the people that get killed in these conflicts, like American soldiers that get killed, are from the American heartland that would potentially be part of the robust working class. And some of those that come back from those wars have insane PTSD, end up getting hooked on opioids, and are completely battle scarred. And this is one issue that we can get creative on. Now, to your point about the Trump administration's faults on foreign policy, I think there's a bigger picture issue at stake. And this goes back to Douglas McGregor. I'll take McGregor at the German ambassador position because we have to start somewhere. Ultimately, foreign policy, I think, is automated in a way because it's the bureaucracy, not the elected officials that run it. It's like the State Department, the CIA, all these deep state organizations that stay in the background regardless of who's elected, that ultimately call the shots and implement the policies. So we have to just build up a farm team of state policy officials, diplomats, what have you, that can get incorporated into the Trump administration and other right-wing administrations and actually put forward more non-interventionist foreign policy. Because at the end of the day, we can complain all we want about how things don't change, but if we don't have people that are getting in the game and incorporating themselves into like the state apparatus, we're never going to win. So I think that there needs to be like just more punditry in our movement that's focused on foreign policy, that can argue these points cogently and can move up the ladder, whether it's like in think tanks, media outlets, or if they're actually in the military, that would also help because it gives us a lot of credence, and put them like in the State Department and other institutions. But until we have that base, I think we're going to be engaging in an uphill struggle.
You make an excellent point about getting people in the right positions, that it is this bureaucratic machine that needs to be moved. And so the McGregor appointment is all the more important for that. On the grassroots level, on what conservatives can do, I would suggest this: make it a localist movement. And people think that you can't really change what's happening in the foreign policy realm just from your own backyard. But I disagree, and here's why. You have a movement called Defend the Guard, and this is about bringing National Guard troops home who are rightfully under the command of the governor. And right now in Syria, Trump said he was removing troops out of Syria. It was really like off of the Syrian border and moving them onto these oil fields to guard the oil or take the oil, as he said, just more misguided, like, slightly off the point of the original MAGA agenda that we really need to get back onto, especially in foreign policy. So who's guarding these oil fields in Syria are National Guard troops out of North and South Carolina, mostly. At least half of them, I believe, are North and South Carolina National Guardsmen. And what's happening in this country? Do you think we might need the National Guard for something else? Like, it used to be that we would put the National Guard on the border. Some would say, like, we'll take them off the border of Korea, take them off the border of Syria, and put them on the U.S. border. And that's fair enough. Fine, fair enough. I mean, Trump has downsized illegal immigration and legal immigration overall. And he hasn't done it with like military force, really. So we also have the problem of insurrection in the country. We have National Guard troops being deployed. It's sort of political theater for election year right now. But in all seriousness, the troops are needed here more than over there. And probably they're not even, we could probably cut some loose, honestly. I mean, there's a lot of bureaucracy there. So part of it is getting in the bureaucracy. The other part is cutting the bureaucracy, getting in there and cutting it to give the people more control. But in a sense of raising hell, instead of just going out into the streets, what the average conservative can do is go to their city council, go to their community board hearing, go to their state capital, and eventually build a coalition among local efforts. And this has been done. This has been shown. The 10th Amendment Center has recorded some of these events. But really, if you just look up Defend the Guard, you'll find that it's spontaneously taking off on its own in several states. And this is a great way to fight the warfare state from home. And that is, rebuilding the infrastructure of the American Republic. I mean, it's supposed to be from the bottom up. It's supposed to be the people in the states, directing the majority of the policy, with the federal government serving the states in certain, realms. Obviously now we see the federal government's really running the show, and the states are more or less rubber stamping or following along or helping the federal government do its thing. And it's supposed to be the reverse. And so what better issue than war to move things in the reverse direction, to make the states nullify some of these wars effectively by saying, unless a war is declared by Congress, you cannot take our National Guard troops from our state. And so you take those National Guard troops home to North Carolina, South Carolina, take them out of Syria because there's no constitutional declaration of war from the Congress because they're absolutely gutless. So this move to defend the Guard and use the power of the governorship and the state legislature to move the U.S. foreign policy back to a non-interventionist policy is something worth trying. I mean, it's being done, and it's seeing some success. And those moves from the state level tend to have an impact on the federal level. On the federal level right now, they're voting on issues about not cracking down on states that have legalized marijuana. Well, why is that issue in Congress? It's because they brought it up at the state level first. So yes, Jose is exactly right. Let's work to get the right people in the right position in the bureaucracy. But at the grassroots level, what can you do, right? There's not much you can do about Washington, D.C. and the bureaucracy, but there is something you can do about your own state's National Guard troops, especially at a time when people are going nuts out there. And, they're talking about defunding the police and they're rioting. And so it's a good idea to have those National Guard troops on hold and in reserve in the states, even if they're not out on the streets. Maybe they're active on the weekends or something like that. However you want to organize them. It doesn't have to be martial law in the United States in order to end a war abroad. But the point is that we have tough times ahead. We have rough times ahead, mostly maybe because of these wars that we're spending all this time and money on overseas. But now the problems are coming home to roost, and it would be nice if we had the National Guard troops at home. They're not necessarily going to be right wing all the time, but probably predominantly the National Guard, more than other institutions on average, are going to see things in a conservative viewpoint. I mean, I imagine they have a lot of incentives to try and get a lot of woke young people into the National Guard. I know they're going in a lot of other communities that conservatives aren't really seeing success in. So there's some mix there. But the point is that grassroots conservatives can have a say and bring the National Guard troops home from abroad if we nullify these wars. And at the very least, it's going to get the attention of Washington, D.C., the Congress and the president. As we've been implying this whole episode, Jose, the American people don't have a vote in foreign policy. You don't get to vote where the troops go. I mean, as you say, it's all sort of in momentum from the bureaucracy. And we try our best to vote for the anti-war candidate, and we always get more wars or certainly no end to the wars. Well, this time, it's time to work from the local level. That's what I say. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. I prefer that these National Guard be deployed at the border and on the streets, because the whole point of having a military or some type of defense infrastructure is the defense of the American people, not the defense of another country. And I think in the future, some of the biggest conflicts that we're going to have that will directly affect the U.S. are going to come from Mexico, because of the fact that criminal organizations there are becoming even stronger than ever before. These cartels have gone from not just selling drugs, but they've taken over industries, and they're getting military grade weapons. And as long as we have porous borders, you can bet a pretty penny they're coming over here. And compound that with the fact that we have a defund the police movement. Yeah, I'd rather have some type of infrastructure on the border, from walls to National Guard to defend that, instead of trying to set up defense infrastructure, say like in Afghanistan or whatever country we decide to nation build at. And yes, I do like that National Guard movement. That's a great way to get people locally involved And a lot of people don't realize how important local politics is. It's not just the federal level you need to be paying attention to. You need to be paying attention to what's going on in your state legislature and your city council.
Right on. Well, let's wrap it up here, Jose. Now, we have a whole history of wars, there's so many ways to go into this topic. We'll have to do more episodes on this stuff, but if I could just leave a picture in people's minds, I would say, look at the history of America since World War II. Okay, this is sort of the second founding of the country, the second myth after the American Revolution. We have a big myth in World War II. And you look at the history since the United States became a world power after World War II, and you have just missed opportunity after missed opportunity, the growth of the warfare state through the Cold War, after the Cold War, through the War on Terror. Now we're really post-War on Terror in so many ways. And just by the skin of our teeth, we missed a World War III episode with Russia, with Hillary Clinton at the helm. And so if anyone's going to sit on their laurels and think, oh, it's all in a lull now, things have really slowed down, and it's just going to sort of dissipate, and these wars will ultimately end after the dollar cracks and they won't be able to fund it anymore. And so really, we've done all that we can, and now it's just the end of history with the warfare state. I would say no. I would say we really are facing that same 2016 threat again of a Hillary Clinton type president coming in, and in this this sort of existential crisis of meaning for the country. It's a very, very vulnerable spot that the nation is in, where we could just fall into another war, an all-encompassing war, a world war, and it could get really bad. The civil liberty violations are notorious under warfare regimes, and this time they're coming for the right. Under George W. Bush, maybe they called the left unpatriotic. But the way things are going, folks, it's really the pendulum's going to swing hard the other direction. So, Jose, this is a really important topic. I can't wait to talk to you more about it. But there are things people can do, and there's a lot of news people need to get in tune with. I'm glad we talked about Douglas McGregor. I'm really glad you brought him up. There's big news out of the White House recently. Any final words, Jose?
All I have to say is that the right needs to wake up to the fact that that foreign policy is a major issue. It's insanely expensive, both in financial and human life terms. And it's one of the biggest enablers of government growth. It's also going to be a battering ram for the woke crowd soon enough. So you have tons of reasons to oppose it. And I wish more people would get out of this geopolitical time warp of being stuck in the 1930s or in the Cold War to recognize that international politics has changed dramatically, and we have to radically alter foreign policy in a way that preserves whatever is left of our republic and also balance out a lot of the new geopolitical realities in front of us.
All right, well said. So, Jose, for you, why don't you plug your website, your social media, so folks can follow you more?
Yeah, you can follow me on my website, josealnino.com, and you can get a newsletter there on my website tab, where I email every other day about certain political topics, from Second Amendment issues to foreign policy. I'm most active on Twitter. My handle is at Jose Al Nino.
Excellent. For my side, I will push people to nickhankoff.com, where I also have another podcast there touching on some of the same topics that Jose and I talk about. And I'm on social media. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. My podcast is at YouTube, BitChute, but you can go to nickhankoff.com for everything I'm up to. And by the way, Jose's newsletter is fantastic. I'm opening those emails every single time they come through. So definitely check those out. All right, folks, this is the end of this episode of Order and Liberty podcast, the war episode. And it was a pleasure having you. Thanks for tuning in.